When I was 18 years old and standing at the threshold of marriage, I had no idea what lay ahead. The world had its opinions, and so did my own fears. Marriage at that age was not something most people encouraged. They said I was too young, too inexperienced, too unprepared. But in that moment, I wasn't just stepping into a new chapter of life. I was stepping into a divine mystery, one that God Himself had set before me. It's easy to believe that life should follow a particular timeline, that there is a right and wrong time for everything based on human reasoning. We are told to finish school, to build a career, to travel, to explore, to find ourselves before we even consider marriage. And yet, what if the author of life calls us to something different? What if the path He designs does not conform to the blueprint of the world? I had dreams, aspirations, things I wanted to accomplish before settling down. But marriage came like an unexpected tide, not washing away my dreams, but redirecting them. It wasn't something I had planned so soon, but God does not always operate according to human plans. In the moment, I didn't see the full picture. I only knew that something greater than myself was at work. At 18, I was stepping into something sacred. Marriage is not just a relationship, it is a calling. It is a divine appointment, a joining of two souls under the covenant of God. But standing there, facing the weight of such a commitment, I wrestled with uncertainty. Could I do this? Was I ready? Had I lived enough life to make such a decision? The world teaches us to wait until we have all the answers. God, on the other hand, often calls us forward before we understand the why. That's because faith is not about seeing the full path. It's about taking the next step in obedience. Abraham was called to leave his homeland without knowing where he was going. Moses was called to lead before he saw the Red Sea part. The disciples followed Jesus before they grasped who He truly was. And in many ways, stepping into marriage at 18 felt like that. A calling to move forward, not because I had all the answers, but because I was trusting the one who did. There were voices of doubt, and not just from the outside. There were moments I questioned myself. What if I made a mistake? What if I wasn't ready? The world loves to remind us of all the things we lack, but God does not call the prepared. He prepares the called. I didn't need to have all the answers. I only needed to trust that the one who brought me to this moment would carry me through it. Marriage is not about age. It's about purpose. It's about stepping into something bigger than yourself, something designed by God before you even took your first breath. Some people marry at 30 and are unprepared. Others marry at 18 and grow into the calling they have received. The world measures readiness by experience, but God measures it by faith. And so I stepped forward. I said yes to something I didn't fully understand, but trusted was right. I said yes to a journey that would refine me, challenge me, and shape me into someone I could not yet see. The journey was not always easy, and there were times when I felt the weight of my decision. But that's the thing about God's calling. It does not guarantee ease, but it does guarantee purpose. Looking back, I realized that I did not walk into marriage alone. God was already there, preparing the way, equipping me for what was ahead. And while I may have been 18 in years, I was walking in the timing of the one who exists outside of time. So often we want to see the full picture before we take the first step. But faith doesn't work that way. Sometimes God calls us to walk forward before we see the destination. And when we do, we find that He was there all along, guiding us into something far greater than we ever could have planned for ourselves. Trusting in divine timing is one of the hardest things to do, especially when it contradicts what the world expects. We live in an age where control is everything, where people plan every step of their lives, believing that security lies in preparation and personal achievement. Society teaches us that there is a right time for everything, but it defines that timing through logic, statistics, and social norms rather than divine wisdom. From the moment we are born, we are placed on a timeline. Graduate high school by this age, go to college, get a degree, establish a career, find yourself first, travel, date around, and only when you have checked off every worldly milestone should you even think about marriage. The idea of committing your life to someone at 18 seems absurd in today's culture. The world says you're too young, you haven't lived yet, you need to focus on yourself. But God's timing is not bound by man's calendar. His ways are not our ways, and His plans often lead us in directions we never expected. When I stepped into marriage at 18, I wasn't just stepping into a relationship, I was stepping into a divine appointment. I didn't have everything figured out. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing. God was leading me into something greater than myself. It didn't make sense to the world, and at times, it didn't even make sense to me. But faith is not about logic, it's about obedience. Throughout Scripture, we see God calling people into situations that defy human reasoning. He called David to be a king when he was just a shepherd boy. He called Mary to be the mother of the Messiah when she was just a young girl. He called the disciples to leave their nets and follow Him before they understood the magnitude of their calling. God doesn't wait for us to be ready in the way the world defines it. He calls us in His perfect timing, and then He equips us along the way. At 18, I faced the reality of stepping into marriage before I had accomplished the things the world told me I needed to do first. I heard the voices of doubt, both from others and within myself. I was told I would miss out on life, that I was sacrificing my youth, that I should wait until I was older, more experienced, more established. But here's the truth. God does not operate by the world's standards. The idea that I had to experience a certain number of years alone before I could fully live was a lie. My life was not being delayed by marriage. It was being aligned with God's purpose. When God brings something into your life, whether it be marriage, a calling, or an opportunity, the question is not, am I ready, but is this His time? Because if it is His time, then He will prepare you, strengthen you, and guide you through it. Too often, people miss out on their purpose because they are waiting for the perfect moment. But the perfect moment never comes. The enemy loves to make us believe that we are always one step away from being ready, that we need just a little more time, a little more preparation, a little more independence before we step into what God has for us. But faith does not wait for the stars to align. It moves when God says, go. The world teaches self-reliance, but the kingdom of God teaches trust. The world says, build your life first, then bring someone into it. But God says, let me build your life according to my plan, and I will provide what you need in my perfect time. Trusting in divine timing means surrendering the illusion of control. It means understanding that what seems too soon to the world is right on time in the eyes of God. Looking back, I see the wisdom in God's timing. Marriage at 18 was not a mistake. It was a divine setup. It was not an interruption. It was an initiation into a journey that required faith, dependence on Him, and a willingness to walk a path that looked different from the world's blueprint. Had I waited for the right time, according to human standards, I would have missed out on the blessings, the lessons, and the purpose that unfolded through marriage. God's timing does not always make sense in the moment, but it is always perfect. Sometimes He calls us to step forward when we feel unprepared, because He knows that the journey itself is what prepares us. Trusting in divine timing means believing that He sees the full picture when we can only see a fragment. And when we choose to walk in obedience rather than fear, we find that His timing is not only right, it is far better than anything we could have planned for ourselves. Marriage at 18 was not just a commitment, it was a journey of growth, transformation, and refinement. The world often paints marriage as a destination, a final step after years of preparation, self-discovery, and independence. But the truth is, marriage itself is a process of becoming. It is not something you enter into fully prepared. It is something that prepares you. When I said I do, I was stepping into an unfamiliar world. I had ideas about love, about commitment, about what it meant to build a life together, but ideas are not the same as experience. The early days of marriage were filled with learning how to communicate, how to be patient, how to put someone else's needs before my own. At 18, I was still figuring out who I was. And now I was also learning how to build a relationship that reflected God's design. The world often tells us to wait until we are fully formed before committing to marriage. They say, find yourself first, then get married. But what if part of finding yourself happens within marriage? What if the process of learning, growing, and maturing is meant to happen together rather than apart? The challenges came quickly. There were moments of frustration, misunderstandings, and the realization that love is not just a feeling, but a daily decision. Love in marriage is not about what you receive, it is about what you give. It is about sacrifice, humility, and choosing grace, even when emotions say otherwise. At 18, I was confronted with the reality that love is not effortless. It is cultivated. And it is cultivated through the trials, the disagreements, the moments when selfishness must die so that unity can live. Many people think challenges in marriage are a sign that something is wrong, but they are actually a sign that something is being built. Just as fire refines gold, struggles refine love. The difficulties did not mean the marriage was failing, they meant it was being strengthened. Marriage is not about avoiding hardships, it is about enduring them together, growing through them, and allowing them to deepen the bond that God has created. And there were days when I questioned if I was too young, if I should have waited, if I had made the right choice, but then I saw how every challenge was shaping me, how I was learning to love selflessly, how I was developing patience, how I was seeing life through the lens of partnership rather than individual ambition. Marriage was not stunting my growth, it was accelerating it. The world teaches independence, but God teaches unity. The world says, make sure you have built your life first, but God says, let me build your life through this covenant. If we waited until we had mastered love before committing to it, none of us would ever be ready. But marriage is not about having all the answers. It is about growing into them together. I learned that growth in marriage does not happen in isolation. It happens in the daily choices, in the moments of choosing patience over irritation, in the willingness to apologize first, in the quiet sacrifices that no one sees. Growth happens when love is tested and still chooses to endure. One of the most significant lessons I learned was that marriage is not just about my happiness, it is about holiness. It is about becoming more Christ-like through the process of loving another person. At 18, I was focused on what marriage would bring into my life. But over time, I realized that marriage was also about what it was taking out of me: pride, impatience, selfishness. It was a refining fire, making me more like the person God intended me to be. Many fear young marriage because they believe they will miss out on life. But what if marriage is part of life's greatest adventure? What if instead of waiting to be fully ready, God calls us to step into the unknown, knowing that the journey itself will prepare us? Looking back, I see how every struggle was not just a test, but a tool shaping, molding, and strengthening the foundation of our love. Marriage at 18 was not easy, but it was part of God's divine plan for my growth. And through every challenge, I came to see that love is not about arriving at a perfect place. It is about walking together, step by step, into God's greater purpose. Marriage is not just a legal contract between two people. It is a covenant, a sacred bond designed by God Himself. In today's world, the idea of marriage has been reduced to something temporary, something conditional, something that can be changed or broken based on how people feel. But from the beginning, marriage was never meant to be a human invention. It was a divine creation. It was established by God, not as a mere agreement, but as a covenant, one that reflects His own nature, His love, and His unbreakable promises. At 18, I stepped into marriage, not fully grasping the depth of what I was entering into. The world had its own definition of marriage, but God had His. The world calls marriage a partnership, but God calls it a reflection of His relationship with His people. The world says marriage is about mutual benefit, but God says it is about selfless love, sacrifice, and commitment. The world sees marriage as an option, but God sees it as a calling. In a society where relationships are often based on convenience, emotions, and personal fulfillment, the idea of a lifelong covenant seems radical. People say, if it doesn't work out, you can always walk away. But God's design for marriage is not based on human convenience. It is built on divine faithfulness. When God established marriage, He did not create it to be something that could be discarded when it became difficult. He created it as a lasting covenant, a union that mirrors His unwavering love for us. A covenant is not like a contract. A contract is based on terms and conditions. If one party fails, the other has the right to walk away. But a covenant is different. A covenant is a sacred promise sealed before God and not dependent on changing circumstances. In the Bible, God made covenants with His people, and even when they failed, He remained faithful. That is the kind of love marriage is meant to reflect. Not a love that is conditional, but a love that endures. At 18, I had to learn that marriage was not about personal happiness, but about divine purpose. It was about stepping into something greater than myself, something that required surrender, humility, and trust in God's design. The covenant of marriage is not just about two people promising to stay together. It is about becoming one in the sight of God. It is about learning to love as Christ loves, to serve as He serves, and to remain faithful as He remains faithful. The world sees love as an emotion, something that comes and goes, but love in a covenant is not based on how we feel. It is based on a choice, a commitment, a sacred vow. Feelings change, circumstances shift, but a covenant remains. That is why marriage is not sustained by romance alone, but by a deep, unwavering decision to honor the commitment made before God. Marriage at 18 required me to shift my perspective. It was no longer just about me, my plans, my desires. It was about something bigger. It was about learning what it meant to truly love another person, to put their needs above my own, to fight for the covenant even when emotions wavered. It was about dying to self so that something greater could be built. The world says to wait until you are ready for marriage. But when are we ever truly ready for something so sacred, so refining? Marriage is not something we master before we enter. It is something that shapes us, teaches us, and prepares us for the deeper purposes of God. There were times when the weight of the covenant felt heavy. There were moments of struggle, of conflict, of questioning. But through it all, I realized that marriage was never about perfection. It was about perseverance. It was about relying on God's strength rather than my own, about allowing Him to transform my heart, about learning to love with the kind of love that does not give up. In today's culture, people view marriage as something temporary, something that can be broken when it no longer feels good. But that is not God's design. His design for marriage is rooted in faithfulness, in endurance, in the kind of love that goes beyond human strength. A love that forgives, that restores, that reflects the covenant He has made with us. At 18, I may not have fully understood what I was stepping into, but I knew one thing. I was stepping into something sacred. Marriage was not just about me, it was about God's purpose, His plan, and His faithfulness. And in a world where relationships are often built on shifting foundations, I came to understand that a covenant marriage is not built on emotions, but on the unshakable foundation of God's truth.
Love is often misunderstood in today's world. It is portrayed as a feeling, an emotion that comes and goes, something that exists only when it benefits us. But marriage taught me that love is so much more than an emotion. It is a commitment, a sacrifice, a daily choice. At 18, I entered marriage with ideas about love, but I quickly learned that true love is not about what you receive, but about what you give. When I first got married, I thought love was easy. The emotions were strong, the excitement was fresh, and everything felt effortless. But love that is built only on emotions is fragile. It wavers when difficulties arise. It fades when circumstances change. True love, the kind that sustains a marriage, is not just about passion. It is about perseverance. It is about choosing to love even when the feelings aren't as strong, even when things don't go as planned, even when sacrifice is required. Marriage at 18 forced me to grow in ways I never expected. I had to learn that love is not selfish. It does not demand its own way. It does not keep score. Love is about giving even when you feel empty. It is about putting someone else's needs before your own, even when it's inconvenient. The world tells us to love as long as it benefits us, as long as it makes us happy. But the love that God designed for marriage is a love that gives, a love that serves, a love that endures. There were moments in marriage when my patience was tested, moments when I had to choose forgiveness over pride, when I had to set aside my own desires for the sake of unity. At 18, I was still growing, still learning, still figuring out who I was. And now I was learning how to love someone selflessly. I came to understand that love is refined through trials. It is easy to love when everything is going well, when there are no conflicts, when life is smooth. But real love is proven in the difficult moments, in the misunderstandings, in the disagreements, in the days when exhaustion and stress make emotions fragile. Love is not about perfection, it is about commitment. The world often confuses love with convenience. It teaches us that we should only love when it feels good, when it's easy, when the other person meets our expectations. But marriage revealed to me that true love is about sacrifice. It is about laying down your own desires, your own pride, your own expectations for the sake of something greater. One of the biggest lessons I learned in marriage was that love is a reflection of Christ. In the Bible, we see that Christ's love was not based on convenience or ease. It was based on sacrifice. He loved us even when we were undeserving. He gave himself for us even when we failed. And in marriage, we are called to love in that same way, to love when it is hard, to love when we don't feel like it, to love in a way that reflects God's heart. At 18, I didn't realize how much love required. I thought it was simply about being with someone you care about sharing your life with them. But I learned that love is about serving. It is about choosing kindness when frustration is easier. It is about speaking life when words could tear down. It is about building each other up instead of focusing on weaknesses. Love in marriage is tested in the small moments. The way you respond after a long day, the willingness to listen when you'd rather talk, the effort to understand instead of assuming the worst. These are the moments that shape love, that strengthen it, that turn it into something unbreakable. The world defines love by what we can get, but God defines love by what we can give. Jesus said, "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." In marriage, we are called to lay down our lives daily, not just in the grand dramatic moments, but in the simple everyday choices. At 18, I was just beginning to grasp what that kind of love meant. And as I walked through the journey of marriage, I realized that love is not about finding the perfect person. It is about learning to love an imperfect person with the same grace and patience that God has shown us. There were days when I had to remind myself that love is not about keeping score. It is not about who apologized first or who gave more. Love does not keep a record of wrongs. It does not seek to win arguments, but to win heart. It chooses unity over division, peace over pride, service over selfishness. I also learned that love is strengthened by gratitude. When you focus on what is lacking, you begin to feel dissatisfied. But when you choose to see the blessings, to be thankful for the person beside you, love grows deeper. Gratitude changes your perspective. It shifts the focus from what you wish was different to what is already beautiful. At 18, I had no idea how much love would shape me. I had no idea how much it would require, how much it would stretch me, how much it would teach me about God's heart. Love is not just about being happy. It is about becoming more like Christ. It is about learning to love, not with a fleeting emotion, but with an unwavering commitment. And through every trial, every lesson, every sacrifice, I came to understand that true love, the love that lasts, the love that endures, is the love that gives. When I got married at 18, I didn't fully understand what I was stepping into. I had dreams, hopes, and expectations, but I also had fears, doubts, and uncertainties. The world told me I was too young, that I would miss out on life, that I should wait until I was older, more experienced, more independent. But looking back, I see that God was leading me into something far greater than I could have imagined. Marriage at 18 was not just a decision. It was a calling, a journey, a refining process that shaped me in ways I never expected. The journey of marriage is one of transformation. It is not a static commitment. It is a living, breathing, evolving covenant. At 18, I had an idea of what marriage would be, but the reality was so much deeper. It was not just about love, it was about growth. It was not just about companionship, it was about refinement. It was not just about happiness, it was about purpose. One of the greatest lessons I learned was that marriage is not the end of personal growth, it is the beginning of it. Many believe that they must first reach a certain level of maturity before they commit to marriage, that they must have life figured out before they enter a covenant. But marriage itself is one of the greatest teachers of maturity. It forces you to grow, to change, to let go of selfishness, to develop patience, to learn humility. It is through marriage that you discover strengths you didn't know you had and confront weaknesses you never wanted to face. At 18, I was still discovering who I was, but marriage gave me the opportunity to grow within the safety of a covenant. Instead of figuring out life alone, I learned what it meant to grow alongside someone else. I realized that love is not about finding someone who completes you, but about becoming complete in Christ together. It is about sharpening one another, encouraging one another, challenging one another to become better, to walk closer with God, to build a life that honors Him. Marriage tested me, stretched me, and refined me. And Mary tested me, stretched me, and refined me. It revealed the areas of my heart that still needed healing, the places where pride needed to be broken, the ways in which I needed to become more like Christ. Through the struggles and victories, I came to understand that love is not just about what we receive. It is about what we are willing to give, how we are willing to serve, how deeply we are willing to commit. The world teaches us that love should always be easy, that if something requires effort, it must not be right. But that is not the truth. Anything valuable requires investment. Anything meaningful requires sacrifice. Love is not proven in the moments when everything is perfect. It is proven in the moments when things are difficult, when emotions waver, when patience is tested, and yet you choose to stay. You choose to fight for what God has given you. You choose to honor the covenant, even when it is hard. Marriage also taught me the power of surrender. There were moments when I wanted to control everything, when I wanted things to go my way, when I resisted the process of growth because it was uncomfortable. But I learned that marriage is not about control. It is about trust. Trusting God to lead, trusting Him to guide our steps, trusting him to work in the heart of my spouse, even when I could not see the change I wanted in the moment. At 18, I thought I knew what love was, but I had only scratched the surface. Love is not just about romance, grand gestures, or emotional highs. It is about commitment in the quiet moments. It is about choosing grace when frustration is easier. It is about speaking words of life instead of criticism. It is about building together instead of tearing down. Love is not just a feeling, it is a choice, a daily decision to honor the covenant, to choose unity over division, to reflect God's love even when it requires humility and sacrifice. Many people hesitate to marry young because they fear they will miss out on life. But what if marriage is part of life's greatest adventure? What if instead of holding you back, it actually launches you forward into a deeper understanding of love, faith, and purpose? Marriage at 18 did not limit me, it expanded me. It gave me the opportunity to experience life with someone who walked beside me through every joy and every trial. It gave me the chance to learn, to grow, to love in ways I never would have if I had waited for the perfect time. There is no perfect time for marriage. There is only God's time. The world's wisdom says to wait until you are fully ready. But when are we ever fully ready for something that requires so much of us? Growth does not happen before marriage, it happens within it. If we waited until we were perfect, we would never take that step. But marriage is not about perfection, it is about willingness. A willingness to trust, a willingness to grow, a willingness to love with a love that endures. Looking back, I see that saying I do at 18 was not a mistake. It was a divine appointment. It was a step into a journey that shaped me, transformed me, and revealed to me the beauty of God's design for marriage. It was not always easy, but it was always worth it because love, the real, enduring, sacrificial love that God designed, does not fade. It does not break. It does not walk away. It stays. It endures. It becomes stronger through every season. Marriage at 18 was not just a decision. It was the beginning of a lifelong journey. A journey of faith, of love, of learning what it truly means to become one. And through it all, I have come to see that the greatest love stories are not the ones that are perfect, but the ones that persevere.